Smurfs, Redwall, Honey I Shrunk the Kids, The Littles, The Invisibles, and so much more, and they all have one thing in common.
Is that they're all about tiny creatures going on adventures, perhaps? Let's talk about playing tiny creatures in your D&D game.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
I'm Nerdarchy Steve. Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds.
Now let us get fun-sized in this video.
So in this video, we're going to kind of ask the question and kind of dissect, have you ever wanted to play a tiny creature in your D&D game? Or maybe the whole party are all tiny creatures in the campaign.
And there's definitely, an appeal for this, whether you're talking about wanting to, play a campaign where you're playing all the wizard's familiars, and while this great big adventure is going on, there's all this stuff happening that the wizards just don't know about, or so many other different directions that you could go.
Yeah, I mean, even all the things that we mentioned kind of in the intro, a lot of them have this idea that there's this, smaller world that exists below or beneath the greater world that, doesn't know about it. So there's definitely something to that. The idea of this world within a world, which can be kind of interesting and fun. And not only that, though, I'm pretty sure throughout the editions of D&D, there's always been those players like, can I play a fairy? Can I play a sprite? Can I play a pixie? Or some other tiny creature? Can I be an awakened raccoon? You name it, it's probably there and has happened. And it's like the rules as they are now, even throughout the editions, never really supported that very well. And I don't know why, but D&D hates tiny creatures.
Well, it's kind of amusing because, the aspect of, well, it's this big, how can it possibly survive? But then we still, we have human size going up against building-sized opponents, constructs, legendary creatures, ancient dragons, what have you. They have the ability to, okay, how do you possibly survive an attack from something that much larger than you? So, the scale does kind of pare down to, well, it exists if you want to play the tiny going up against, medium and large.
Yeah, for sure. But now that being said, we aren't the only ones to ask this question, apparently, because the folks over at Hit Point Press have a Kickstarter going on right now in conjunction with our friend Daryl T. Jones from Splattered In Games, Seeds of Decay, which is all about this world of tiny creatures and animalkin. There's all kinds of cool things over there in his Daubers setting, and Daubers are kind of like this forest gnome tiny creature. They're only 18 inches tall. He's made a board game about it. There's been comic books about it, and now for years he's also been running in games in that world. I've even played in some of those games where I played as a rat, not a ratkin, not rat folk, not a were-rat, but an actual rat, and it was the tank of the party. So this rule set has a whole adventure campaign arc where you play as these tiny creatures, but it also gives the rules for playing in a campaign where you are all tiny creatures, and it does mix in some small and medium creatures as well. So it could be a great rules expansion to your game.
So the set comes with 3 modular rule systems for inventions, contraptions, and forging, 30 plus original spells, 30 plus fully illustrated items, 60 plus new monsters, create your own playable forest animal species, new classes, subclasses, backgrounds, feats, and more, and an adventuring arc spanning levels 1 through 8 with side quest hooks and expansive lore for an open world feel. The add-on items have got, dice and cards and so many other more. There's a lot of cool stuff that's a part of this Kickstarter.
It's already funded. There will be a link down in the description. One of these cards up here. You can go check it out. The art's really fun. With that, let's jump back into our content.
All right, so I guess the first kind of question is, what is the appeal? Why would people want to get into a tiny adventure? Is it that much more grandiose being, small and exploring the wider world?
I think it is that David versus Goliath kind of thing where, you want to face insurmountable odds, and also just exploring the world through different eyes, looking at, a traditional fantasy campaign that that's normal to you, and, kind of turn it on its head by going, okay, well, a giant in this game might just be a person, right? Just a regular commoner compared to, tiny creatures of the forest or even smaller. And also, like, I think there's a part of it where there's like these cutesy aspects that some gamers really enjoy in like exploring. Some of it is just harkens back to our childhood. A lot of those things that we mentioned before were, either cartoons or movies that we enjoyed when we were little, like Smurfs, Snorks, like those things, they were tiny creatures. And, like Smurfs, like their big bad was Gargamel, which is just a person, really. Well, a wizard, but like a really bad one.
He was basically an apprentice wizard, as I would see it. But like, I mean, I even mentioned Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and that could be something that, as opposed to going with a plot line of, well, I just shrunk you down. Well, what if the same kind of effect happened, and you could take a side quest? You're playing your regular world, and voila, these characters are all, transmutated into a character of their choice. Like, okay, well, you guys are, this level, this is all going on. I want you to roll up level 1 characters using this Dauber's set or the Seeds of Decay set. And then we're going to have an adventure, and you guys are going to try and get back to, your regular characters. I think that would be an awesome little side venture and see this world that you might not have had a clue about before.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely do a thing where something happens, magical catastrophe, whatever, and like in the middle of the session, you just hand each of the players like a re-envisioned character that is their character, which would be fun because if it captures like the core elements of their character, but they had this new form, these new limitations, and then also maybe they're also interacting with other tiny creatures and discovering this new world. And also it really can lend itself to the exploration phase because you can take the familiar and normal and reimagine it and re-explore it, through the eyes of these tiny creatures. And, Daubers is just one example, but there's some other ones that I found. When we were talking about doing this video, I immediately thought about Alex Agunas. Years ago, when we first started doing Nerdarchy, we encountered him. And one of the things that I encountered him through was an adventure he'd written for Pathfinder. And, it was called Micro-Sized Adventures. And the idea was that you got shrunk down to like the size of ants, right? Where you could either use ants as mounts or maybe you had to face off against them. Which makes me think of Ant Bully, like as a movie where like this kid would like destroy ant hills and stuff, and so the ants perform some ritual to make them ant size so that you can experience what it's like to have to deal with an ant bully.
Yeah. I mean, even in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, there was like an ant. I think they named him Anthony. I could be wrong, but it was a scenario where like they befriended the ants so that they could use it as a mount. So that's an amusing to be like, okay, you can get to that size.
Humblewood is another one that comes to mind because it
also by Hit Point Press.
Also by Hit Point Press, but it's also another thing where you have these cutesy, I think they're supposed to be smaller animals, but anthropomorphic creatures, and it adds this like very cute element to the fantasy world that we're used to.
And I guess we could also mention the Familiar's Quandary, which is kind of what I was talking about of playing an adventure as the wizard's familiar. It's over on D&D Beyond if you want to go check it out. There's a stream for it and everything.
Yeah, so there's some links to those, like to the resources that we mentioned that we'll throw up there as well. So how would you handle incorporating tiny creatures into your game?
Well, I think, for me as a seasoned DM, I could go in the vein of, well, do we want to run an all tiny creatures kind of a, Seeds of Decay, Dauber's kind of scenario, or are we looking to have an intermingled where you could be like, all right, I'm totally just going to play, the squirrel, the rat, the owl in the party, and this is just an animal that's completely badass and intermingled with other, small and medium-sized creatures. And you would just have to incorporate things that become a challenge for, how is the rest of the party going to get into an area where the tiny creature can, or, how are you going to challenge you can't fly, you can't climb, but you have to get up this mountainside. It's going to be an awful lot of work for something as small as you are. Are you hitching a ride with your companions? So there's ways to kind of test everyone in the party.
What about mechanically? Like, I feel like the natural inclination to this kind of stuff is like limit mechanics and stats and stuff like that, where I don't think I would go that route.
No, I feel like, if you're going to do this and you're going to incorporate it within 5e, you've got to treat it like it's a 5e. If we can literally take a human who can stand up to a kick from an ogre or a slash from a dragon, there is no problems, in my opinion, of like, oh, you want to play a house cat that's not, Puss from Puss in Boots, but literally just a house cat? Sure, let's find a way to make this house cat the most badass house cat ever, and roll up your character like anybody else, and voila, treat it like that.
Yeah, there's already rules for carrying capacity, so it's not like if you have an 18 strength and you're 18 inches, you're going to lift as much as the human with an 18 strength, right? Just by, just like there's other features that make things that are kind of supposed to be bigger size, but they're medium, even stronger by, increasing their carrying capacity and stuff like that. So I believe there's rules to cover that. And I guess what I would probably do is, like, if I have a group of tiny creatures and I wanted to represent them going up against something like, like a commoner, I might just use the stats for an ogre and just be like, yeah, like in comparison to them, that's what their stats are going to be like, because it's just so much bigger and even though it's really just a commoner.
So you can adjust the scale of what things are, and perhaps what is normally a commoner might be a challenge, 1, 2, 3, as opposed to like the quarter or a 0 that things might be. Or you could just be like, all right, no, there is something entirely special about you, and that house cat or that rat is really that much more so than every other rat. Maybe that's part of the game, is to figure out why or what it is about you that is different. Or, maybe that's not the question at all. Like, you just want to go out and you want to adventure. Maybe you can, you can talk. Maybe you cannot talk. It's just get in there and do what that character is meant to do.
I think that's where, like, the tension will kind of lie in the different people that want to incorporate something into their game, where some of them are like, oh, I don't want it to mean anything, but I want to be tiny, right, mechanically. And then others being like, well, there should be some drawback to being, a fraction of the size of everything else in the world. You shouldn't be able to interact with it the same way everybody else can. And like striking that balance, what your group wants. Now, this could be a conversation, and you can decide, what that's going to be like. Or as the DM, you could kind of shift things. Like, I think in my games, I would like, they will probably face more things that are like normal animals, but I will just use the giant versions,
right,
to say, like, in comparison to them, that's what those creatures are kind of like. Now, where it gets tricky is if they actually did encounter the giant version of the thing. Is like, what do you use then, right? Like, you have to upgrade the giant rat to like a brown bear or something.
You've got the ability to just dial up, add some more hit dice, increase the modifier, increase the damage. Any of the things that you feel is going to represent the challenge that you're looking for, and every creature, every stat block that's out there always has the ability to be modified to be more, deadly, more dangerous, with just some minor tweaks along those lines. But it's literally up to you as to what kind of things that you're looking for and what kind of stories you're looking to tell.
What advice would you give to a DM that wants to like incorporate this into their group if it's something they want?
So I would ask the question of, is the tiny creature or creatures special? How special is that aspect to the storyline, if at all? And then what is the player looking to get out of being that? Once you ask those questions, that's going to inform your choices as to whether or not you have to modify things that are existing, or whether you're going to treat it just like any other adventure, and you're going to have to just deal with the caveat of, well, this or these creatures are tiny.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing too is like, do you want to mix in like tiny creatures in with the regular player? I think that's the hardest thing. Like if you just have like that one or two players that want to play this tiny creature and everyone else wants to play normal D&D, or not normal, but standard, whatever's considered standard. And then like, as opposed to like if everybody wants to do the thing, then it's just a matter of changing the scale, right? So it's like, oh, well, everything does kind of work like it normally would, only the threats are much smaller, in scope. If you were to introduce an actual dragon, it would be like, you'd be like mites in compared to it, right? You'd be like fleas, maybe even beneath its notice.
Right.
Whereas you wanted to introduce a dragon worthy of your tiny adventuring group, it would be more like a pseudo dragon or a fairy dragon.
Well, I mean, those are the kind of things that you can use as literal plot lines. You mentioned it perfectly of, well, there are so many things that are out there that you just might be beneath the notice of. Yeah. So, like, you could have an adventure in and around, like, oh, well, we happen to live inside a dragon's hoard. There's plenty of stuff that's there. We can't touch it. We can't take it because the dragon would know that aspect. But are you defending the dragon from these, tiny infestations that are out there? Like, that could be a whole one shot of dragon has no clue we're here, but we like the dragon because he provides us protection from the bigger things that are out there, even though he has no clue about it. And therefore, we're going to protect him from these minor things that he doesn't even know about.
Hear me out. You've run a campaign based off of the borrowers or the littles, and you live in a dragon's hoard. And, you're the things that live in the walls, essentially, that are messing with stuff and basically driving the dragon crazy as they're trying to figure out what is going on. But then, like, maybe you do really helpful things for the dragon, because I think, like, Fizzbands introduced, like, parasites and threats to the dragon's eggs and stuff. And, like, maybe, like, you see that as your duty is to guard those and take care of those threats. And they're the dragons that you slay. They're, like, basically, like, egg ticks and mites.
That could be, pretty amusing. And if we're talking about low-level things, I mean, there's plenty of, wormlings that could be like, wow, that's the real challenge.
Yeah, a wormling is an actual dragon that you have to face, or even just like drakes.
Well, right, what I'm saying is those are the mites. You use the stat blocks for, the wormlings, and that's what you gotta, contend with.
Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could go and have fun with this in a campaign. And you know what? It might just be a way to break things up and introduce something different. Sometimes people just want to play something a lot more lighthearted. This might be the type of adventure for you. It doesn't have to be that way, but it definitely could be.
You could absolutely run this as that lighthearted, that feel-good, positive vibes. Or you could play this as like, super gritty, super real. There's some, like I mentioned, Secret of Nim, like that's some real gritty hardship factor of something that's tiny. So if you go in that direction, it's like, it's brutal. And you could play kind of grimdark fantasy, but as tiny creatures. And do you survive or do you not?
Random encounter. A commoner walks by, steps on one of you. They're just done. They're just going into and commoner doesn't even know. That smear there, that was Bob.
Poor Bob.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Would you introduce cute and cuddly and tiny adventurers into your game? Have you done it? Do you have advice or suggestions for the Nerdarchy community? Let us know down in the comments below.
While you're down there, don't forget to do all those fun things like, share, subscribe. Even go ahead and click on that notification bell. You know the drill.
Quick reminder, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we drop new videos here on the channel, so come on back. Can't wait till then? No worries. We've got you covered. There's a card up here that you can check out. D&D Monsters, using massive monsters to mash your D&D party.
So until next time, stay nerdy.